It's a little obvious from the sign, but I'm at Frimley Pits down in Surrey, and what I want to do today is talk you through an amazing story and an amazing period of my life from 2003 to the very beginning of spring in 2007. Frimley is a huge place. There's pit 1 and pit 2 over the other side of pit 3, and just behind us here is pit 4 being the biggest lake of all. However, the lake and the fish I want to talk about live behind me in pit 3. It was an amazing period of my life of just getting out of the army, finding my feet on Civvy Street, helping Lynn with all the problems that she had with the illnesses that were going on, and getting settled down in the world when I decided that I'd make a living from carp fishing somehow. I could write to a certain degree in a very unusual way, and people loved it. And the biggest thing in my life, swam around in this lake, something I'd yearned for 41 years by the time that it happened, and I want to tell you all about it right now. Utterly amazed. There's a guy fishing over there, so I've got to be very quiet. But all this area was a massive brambles all the way through to the swim down there, and you used to have to break your way through as discreetly as you could, and we used to fish right on the edge down here. My first fish was caught from just down there over a couple of handfuls of boilies, and memories, incredible, absolutely incredible. The Frimley complex, probably 5 minutes from my front doorstep in Aldershot, and a wonderful place to be. But it took a long time to come into my sights as a carp fisherman, and I'm often absolutely amazed and fascinated how one's past can shape your future. And two of the greatest things that happened to me as a child was to read action magazines of soldiers, especially about paratroopers, who eventually I started to emulate by jumping out of my bedroom window, holding onto all four corners of my sheet, and very often busting a leg or a bone or two. And the other one was a book I was given by my mother at 6 years old. 1966, underneath the Christmas tree, was Richard Walker's Stillwater Angling. I knew what was there, and when I opened that present, the first present, I didn't even want to open the others. My mother had to encourage me. All I wanted to do was read that book. And within that book, he wrote 2 chapters about carp. And the fascinating thing for me was the first chapter was called Carp, and the second chapter was called Big Carp. And that was the thing that caught my eye. And obviously he talked about catching that 44-pound common from Redmire Pool in 1952, September 52. And it was a record until till 1980, when Chris Yates broke it with a fish from the same water. And that common stayed in my mind for years and years and years. And all I wished of doing in my carp fishing all that time, and I didn't start carp fishing when I was 6 years old, was catching a common carp comparable to Walker's record. Now, coming from the West Country, we didn't even know carp had been invented back in those days. All my fishing was stealing trout from the local rivers and reservoirs, and any pike fishing I could do, and chub fishing. That was about the extent of it. I often got to go sea fishing. I caught conger eel and ling with the Bristol sea anglers, and that was a wonderful day out. But in the back of it was a 44-pound common carp. In 1978, I joined the army, and to get my parachute wings and do the things I wanted to do, I had to come to Aldershot. And I think the first thing that struck me about it, I was a fit lad. I used to run sort of 10, 15 mile a day, do a lot of work in the gymnasium. But on those runs, I used to run down the canal, the Basingstoke Canal, and around a whole host of lakes. Even lakes at Frimley I ran around back then. I got aware of carp being alive then, but I didn't really fish for them. I fished a lot in one of the army lakes for cruising, which I loved. I did catch proper carp out the Basingstoke Canal, which was a real joy. And to me, it told me that carp were catchable, which in everybody's eye in fishing, they weren't. They were an impossible fish to catch, which is the thing that draws so many people to them. So I wanted to catch one. The difficult thing was finding one. The time that I started in search of a carp in Frimley, there was probably one other 40-pound carp, common carp in the country, and that was in the Snake Pit in Essex. And I wasn't going to travel up there. So I got myself a Frimley ticket, and the reason I got that ticket is because I saw a mate of mine, Colin Davidson, on the front cover of the Angler's Mail, who he used to work for, with a 35-pound 12-ounce common. Immediately, I put that on my hit list. That was big enough for me, and I desperately wanted to catch that carp. I knew Colin very well. I used to go off and do magazine features with him a lot back in the day, and I got to know him well. I got to know a few things about Frimley and the fish that lived there. So by the time I got round to fishing it and getting the ticket, I was pretty well armed with some information. Now, the ticket I had was a gold card, and I got that because I used to sometimes write as many as 7 magazine features in a month. It was incredible back then. You know, my whole life was spent tapping away on a computer and taking photographs and having a wonderful time doing it. Things change obviously as they did, but I loved that day, and it got me access to things I probably wouldn't have had access to in any other way. I was advertising their waters, if you like, and they loved every minute of it. So I got a ticket, or I had the ability to fish in the winter of 2003, 2004. My wife, again, won't thank me for mentioning it, but that was probably when her illness was probably at one of its worst points. And I had to take care of her. My fishing had to go on the back foot a little bit, and I did enough just to get me by. I got a deal with Fox back then, 20 years ago. Unbelievable feeling. I've been with them ever since, and that loyalty is something that's paid me back in spades, and hopefully them. I've loved it, and they've lived all the way through all the things that I've done. Now, there was a point in my life where I had an awful lot of things I wanted to chase. I had an awful lot of fish I wanted to catch. Most importantly of those was shoulders in Horton, and one day I suspect we'll sit up there and I'll tell you about that story as well. I did catch him in the spring of 2005, and that was me finished with Horton, but there were other lakes I wanted to go to. I had a ticket for Mercer's Park up near Reigate, and it was an incredible water. I remember I did a 3-month stint up there whilst I was doing other things, doing 2 days a week. And I had 69 fish, and most of them were over 30 pound. It was just an incredible place. And as working in the commercial world of carp fishing, it was wonderful. I was writing diary in Carp World then, which I wrote in there for many years, and it was a wonderful experience. But I needed to get back to Frimley. Things that stopped me on the way again, and you're so easily led. Sanders, just up the road from here, 5 mile up the road. They were having a massive maggot attack up there, and most known anglers in the area were there. So I just got on the bandwagon, and I had a great few weeks up there catching fish to over 35 pound, all on maggots, which I hate doing, and I'll never do it again. Doing these features, one very memorable one with Colin down in Ringwood, catching loads of carp down there, and using my gold card as much as I could. It seemed a waste to begin with, just to fish on one water when I had so many waters to fish. But the one fish I wanted to catch lived in pit 3 at Frimley. So we come to the winter of 2004, 2005. As I walked through the gate at the top end of the whole venue. The first sight I saw was a small little swim in a bay, and I think it's called the Path Swim. It's kind of spooky, really. I am now standing in a swim that I fished first time in 2004, 19 years ago. It's frightening, and things have changed quite a bit. I mean, they've opened up the lake a lot all round. There's a lot of foliage has gone, which is pretty good for the water, actually. It still looks wonderful, and there's a lot of water movement. And especially with the wind blowing in here today, it reminds me, this was the first swim I ever fished on here. Of course, I had a look around the lake, but I'd left my water bottle in here. And straight away, I could see this swim was going to be a different kettle of fish, if you'll excuse the pun, to fishing in all the other spots around the lake. All the fish that I saw were tight to all the bramble bushes and trees that were hanging over the water, and a lot of it came over about 6 foot, so it was getting as tight as you could to that margin. It was about 5-6 foot deep there, perfect spot to ambush him. And I put it's only 2 rods then, 2 rods over there, and just baited up as I could through the bushes with just over the top of the bushes, right on the edge of the tree line. And yeah, I had 5 fish, and including a mirror carp, which was supposed to be very rare then. No 30-pounders, but I didn't care. I don't my account on Frimley, and yeah, it was. I sort of knew from then on it was a very special place to be. This swim, although it's got a sign in it in the tree called the Dead Hedge, was always known as Swim 3 to me, and it was probably the most important swim on the lake. Every time I came here, we had to park up in the hatches. There was no other access to the lake. And I'd walk down along this bank. I'd obviously look in the pads down to my left there and in the swim next to it for any signs of fish. But I'd stand here most of the time for as long as I could, until something gave the game away from me. I could look right down the middle of the lake, to the left into the pads, the single boards over there, into the bay, round the corner from Fox Point, and basically all the way down to the end of the lake. And I could sit here, and when I saw something at 4 in the morning, that's when I'd move down and set up shop and try and fish from it. And the results came very quickly because of the things that I spotted in this swim. And we say it, endless amounts of times to watch the water. Your eyes are the greatest bit of carp fishing tackle you'll ever own, and this is where I use mine to full extent. And yeah, because of this swim and where it's situated, I never fished it once, but I caught so many fish because of it. It was a wonderful start to proceedings. It was an incredible place. I didn't realise how difficult it was going to be to single out the fish that I wanted to catch, and 2, how many carp I would catch using the tactics that I used. And I was using the NRG boilers from Mainline to begin with. That's the one that I started on here, and it was just unbelievable because the only people who could fish it were 30 bailiffs and other people involved with CMEX, which accounted, and gold card holders, probably accounted to 30, 35 people. There was no night fishing. You could get a day ticket for it, but nobody could fish at night apart from these 30 people. So it was generally quite quiet at night. And you could quite honestly set your watch or correct your watch, because it would be wrong. If the bite came at 11:15, your watch was wrong. Every night at 25 to 11, there would be a bite. It was unreal, just past that 10 mark. And it was something that rang true for a while. They obviously got used to it, and those bites started to get spread out through the nights. And I'll come to the way that I got day bites in a little while. But I was just having fun. Normally there's a little set of pads that come up here. Here, I think. Here, yeah, through here. About there, I think. Again, walking around, There's things bringing smiles to my face everywhere I go. And there was a tiny set of pads out here. There probably still is in the warmer months. And those remnants of it in the winter was such a good place to catch carp from. Yes, I could fish over there and cast to it, but I found the best way, certainly in the day, in the early years on Frimley, there was no night fishing, apart from people who were bailiffing the water or had an RMC gold card, which I had in my pocket, so I could fish nights. Now, in the day, everybody come down for their days and they put a load of fresh bait in and catch nothing. And I used to keep a little sack in the water, one of those tablets for washing tablets. I used to bury it in a garden for about 3 months to get all the smell out of it, smother in bait dip, and I used to put about 50 free offerings in that bag and put them in a peg at the front of my swim in the water. So those baits the following day had been in the water for all that time, and those are the ones that I used around those pads. Just my simple little rig with a little PVA bag of them on there. And the closer you got to the pads, the more bites you get. Obviously, I would lift that fish up, take it back into the fallen tree swim, and duly have my photograph taken. But what a productive spot, and taught me really the art of getting bites in the day here, and that's what I continue to do all the time. And I got so many bites in the day where others were fishing for a day session as they only could do, bless their hearts. With fresh bait. It was incredible. It was only maggots would beat it, but I hate the damn things, so I didn't use them. I've been talking about my obsession with one single fish, and what that tends to do is take away how magnificent this place is, what an unbelievable fishery it is. And in a lot of respects, I think talking about respects is the respects we should pay to the people that created these lakes as carp fisheries. In the background, you may well hear the humming of a dual carriageway, the A331, that is a ring road around Aldershot and Farnborough. That road was built back in the early 90s. And what happened was, there were about 13, 14 lakes on this whole complex. Obviously stuff that had been taken off up to do the M25 or the M3 probably. And they were backfilling them. And they all contained carp. And what the local guys did, and I doffed my cap to them, they weren't stealing fish, they were just replacing them in the same complex. They were taking them out of lakes and putting them into these lakes further and further away. And then it all stopped, and this is what was left. Pit 1 and Pit 2, great waters, unbelievable tiny little waters that are good for creeping around. You got Pit 3, speaks for itself nowadays, and Pit 4 over the path, which I think is about 30 acres, and it's got some really lovely fish in it. That's fishing in a completely different way to Pit 3, and I fished on there too and had some good fish from there and some good fishing. I think one of the best nights I ever had was I was waiting for the double boards to become free, and I'd done what I had seen no one else do. I'd fished about 15 yards in front of the fallen tree swim, and I just put a big long line of boilers, very tight together, but in a long line. I just put 2 rods, one at either end of it. I had 11 fish that night, 6 of them over 30 pound. And, it was an era we live, unfortunately, in a world where, 6 or 7 20 pounders, 4 or 5 30 pounders isn't that much to write home about. Back in the day, that was unbelievable. It was unbelievable fishing, more than I could ever have asked for. It was incredible. The work is still in progress, I think. Amazing. I caught some fantastic fishing there. I've got a lovely picture of me right there by that clump of reeds there with a 34 pound mirror, and I believe that's one of the biggest fish in the lake today. And there were a whole host of others around that size too, and The gums came from here too at £37, was the biggest mirror at the time, and lived on in here to, I think £42 it got to, but that was one of the real characters of the lake. Yeah, it was a brilliant swim. There's loads of features out here, but again, a lot of it is dominated by the exposed bar in front of it, and it tends to draw everybody into it when even round at 20 yards range. There's so many features there, and yeah, so many good little spots. I did some filming down here. Anglian Publications decided they wanted to make a video. It's still out there on disc, called Carp in Focus. And I did a segment for them every month, and they brought it out just about the fishing that I was doing. And I came down, Chris Ball came down to see me, and that night I had 30 pounds and ounces, which is the big fully plated carp that lives in the mirror, and a 32 pound common. And you know, I held them up for the camera, and it was just incredible. It was a wonderful thing to do, and it just showed Frimley off for what it was back in those days, an incredible place. And people were crawling for a ticket. People were buying gold cards simply so they could come down here and do the nights on Frimley. It was a very, very sought after story. The only problem with it, and as I shall explain to you, was the toiletries around here. There weren't any, so yeah, you had to use the bushes. Oh dear, I'm smiling. I'm having a little walk around the lake, and things come at you from the past, and you remember things that happened. The ablutions around the lake back in 2005, 6 and 7 were non-existent. You had to do your own thing, and as discreetly and cleanly as possible. I used to carry a little entrenching tool around with me everywhere I went, and I would go and find a place as far away from the water as possible, dig myself a little hole, do the business, cover it all up and leave it, and hopefully leave no sign of me being there. About 30 yards in there was a little tree all on its own, and I went down. I thought I should make a lovely little backrest, and I dug my little hole with my entrenching tool. Trousers down, I probably had some long johns on as well, so I took those down, and my pants leant against the tree, did my business as you do. I don't want to get any more descriptive than that. And I've stood up after I've done the paperwork, and just out the corner of my eye, there were 3 people about 10 yards away from me with folders and clips on and everything in front, and they were just open-mouthed staring at me, and it was probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life, and I couldn't think of anything to do. I'm standing, all my tackles hanging out, and my trousers are by my knees, and all I could think of doing, I just lifted my hand, morning, pulled my trousers up, I leapt over the little brook there, and I sprinted back to the double boards, faster than Usain Bolt, I reckon. Yeah, a very embarrassing day, but yeah, it's one of those things, they make you smile, and that's what carp fishing is all about. I was in a bit of a dilemma at the sort of the start of the second winter on here, and bearing in mind this is all I wanted to do was fish the winters. That's when I was targeted Charlie's mate, and that's the fish I was zoning in on. What I didn't want to do, and certainly when I left the army, when I knew my transition into Civvy Street, and making sure that Lynn was okay. I mean, she's an amazing lady who is so intent on looking after herself and sorting things out, but I wanted to be close to home, and Frimley fitted the bill. The problem with it was I became obsessed with that fish, and I don't mind saying it. I've never been obsessed about catching lots of carp. I've never been, I would say a little, but I've never been totally blown away by catching a big carp at any time. But Charlie's mate, it was now 40 years that dream had been in my mind, and I just couldn't think of anything else. I mean, I was fishing other places in the summer. I went up to Horton. I caught the famous old parrot from there at 41. the Thorpe Park Common at 37.12, and a few of the other named fish out of there, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. But all I wanted to do was get back to Frimley. We're still, believe it or not, in 2005, and there's still so much going on. I had a ticket for Conningbrook, where I wanted to go fishing after two-tone. He was there. It wasn't particularly the nicest looking fish in the world, but you know, he was the biggest carp in the country, and I you know, having a chance to go and fish for it, I'd have been a fool not to. I had a great time up there. I only fished 3 months. And I was, you know, I think there was a guy called Simon who caught so many out of that year, but I ran in a good second and caught 6 fish in those 3 months. And out of only 22 in the lake, I was really chuffed with it. I got nowhere near the big one, so yeah, I can't show you a picture of that, unfortunately, but I had a good time. And that whole trip was interrupted by my other love in life, which is cricket. And England beating the Australians in the Ashes, and Keith Jenkins and I had tickets for the last 2 days at the Oval to go and see it. And I reeled in from the new side of the lake, as they called it, after having caught a 28-pound common off a spot. And a guy moved in behind me, and as the guys were running around the pitch with the little Ashes urn in their hands, there was a guy in that swim I'd left holding two-tone at 65 pound. And, you know, it might shock a few people, but I knew where I would rather be, and that was cheering the lads at the Oval. What a day, incredible. And seeing the Aussies cry as well, that always pleases me. And I started again for the 2006-2007 winter. And I have to tell you now, I knew this was the last time I would fish it. And as it happens, as the days worked out, the end bit worked out in a kind of strange way and made me smile as I walked out the fishery. The biggest thing for me was how many fish I could get with the bait that I was using. Now, they did allow bait boats on here, which got banned after a while, thank God. And what it meant was people started fishing with smaller amounts of bait, because they just couldn't be bothered spotting. You just didn't see people do it. I've arrived in a swim called the Little Noddy, and I have to tell you, this swim and the one next door played a massive part in what I did at Frimley, and a lot of it was relying on the bait that I was using. I started here with NRG from Mainline, changed it midway through to a new Maplate bait, and the action never stops. As long as I kept applying it, it worked. And out in front of the swim, about 30 yards, is the top of an exposed bar, and it travels a long way up to the right and to the left. There's little sticks on top of it to indicate where that bar is, and it's incredibly steep either side. And what I used to do is stand down in that margin, put my chest waders on, wade out just as far as I could. It gets a bit silty and I still almost get that up to my neck, and fire 15mm boilies over the top of the bar, and they all used to trickle down that slope down to the bottom. And from the double boards on the other side, I could just cast over onto a pile of bait. It was unreal, and you could do 2 nights on, 2 nights off. And those 2 nights off, it got awful for Lynn and me being at home, really. I got so obsessed in the end. I used to drive Lynn up in my little Mondeo, Rosie, bless her heart, best car I ever owned. Nothing ever went wrong with it. Parked Lindy up in the car, in Rosie, up in the hatches where we parked this morning. I walked down here with 2 10-kilo tubes of boilies under my arms, and I would put them over the top of that bar. And you know, I don't think I'm frightened to say it, I probably put a bit of weight on these fish, and got Charlie's mate to where I wanted to be in the end. But it was they were wonderful swims. They were in the ideal position for me to use, you know, in the way that I wanted to fish. And didn't it catch me some fish? I changed over bait that year to Maple 8, and the action just never stopped. That was in the middle of winter. I don't normally change a bait, but I wanted to see what this Maple 8 was all about when Kev Knight told me about it. So I changed over, and it never stopped. The carp get coming. I think I mentioned Gunders before, but it was the beginning of this year. I caught him at 37 pound, and that was the biggest mirror in here. And all I could hope for was at some stage I was going to catch the biggest common in here. I had other distractions. Unbelievably, that year I'd had 4 free trips to Rainbow Lake. Out there in France, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Caught some absolutely massive fish. It's not my type of fishing, but it was a great distraction and something wonderful for me to write about. But I just couldn't wait to get back to Frimley. They didn't have names back then, but I was catching them, and I was catching the same fish a few times over and over again. Black eye was very recognisable. One barb was a very recognisable fish. I actually caught Charlie at 36 pound, which is that relates to Charlie's mate. There were the fully scales. As I said about mirrors earlier on, they weren't exactly, there are a lot of mirrors in here, but what is in here, there are incredible fish. They're so beautiful, and obviously I think they were all brought up from the same fishery. They're all very sort of similar with the scales. The way the scales are is unusual. And there were targets in amongst that. One was called Spike, and when I caught him, he weighed 29 pound and 12 ounces, and I believe, and I got told by all the guys, the bailiffs, the guys that have been here for years and years and years, that it was the 3rd time it had ever been caught. And those were the kind of fish, I don't give a damn how big they are. When you catch fish like that, it's an honour almost. I feel so honoured to have caught it and put it on the bank. And what an incredible carp. Charlie's mate, let's talk about that a little bit. Unfortunately, people were using maggots again in that last year, and I don't like the use of maggots, I have to say that. I don't like the use of bait boats. And what was happening, people were just dropping gallons of them, and the fish would go bonkers for a week, and then for 2 or 3 weeks you just wouldn't get a bite on it. There was one other guy, Paul Bibmead, we stuck to the boilies. We were catching a few, but not as many as others were doing on the maggots. And I remember Martin Bowler had come down with the Angling Times to do an overnight session on Frimley, the only time he'd ever been here. And in the morning, he trotted round about 7 o'clock in the morning, and he said, "I'm so sorry, but would you like to come and have a look at Charlie's mate?" And I sort of put my head in my hands, and I got off my chair. He'd gone back to sort the fish out and the cameraman and everything. And I walked the walk. I trudged the trudge of a defeated man. It was awful. It was like walking the bloody plank on a ship. And I went and saw it. It only weighed 39 pound then, but to see it on the bank, it was such, and still is, an absolutely impressive carp. I remember a guy coming into the fallen tree when I was in the double boards that year, as the winter started in 2006, put a load of bait out, maggots out, and caught Charlie's mate at 43 pound. And seeing it again just poured more fuel on the fire. I had to catch it, but I wasn't going to use a maggot because it doesn't do the fishing any good, and that is what I believe and what I will stick to. Deep Point, this is really where my serious fishing on Pit 3 began. It might sound a little strange in as much as I weren't fishing those other swims, but I looked in every swim. I made sure I did 2 or 3 laps of the lake before I decided where I wanted to go, but living so close to Frimley, I was able to do the baiting up. And I've talked about baiting up in the Noddies and fishing over that bar. And over the 3 winters I was here, I probably caught twice as many carp, not 20 yards from the bank, including the final fish that I so wanted to catch from here. But it was introducing that bait all the time. And when I got into the rhythm of doing it, I was only baiting probably 2 or 3 areas in the end. So that is where all of my attention was drawn. And it was just silly the amount of fish I caught from here in the early days. That first winter off of this point, I caught loads of fish. I mean, they weren't they weren't 40 pounders as they are today. The biggest I'd caught up to a certain point, up to the end of that first winter, was 34 pound. But they were huge fish in those days. We're talking such a long time ago, 18 years ago. And and it was wonderful. But it's that the bait that plays such a massive part in everything. And so many people have said where this lake has got so busy, they don't allow maggots and other baits that reduce the weight of fish. These fish are absolutely piling it on. In this swim itself, a very obvious point, which is the end of the bar out there, and you can actually see the top of it, as you can see from all the swims around here. And most people are focused in fishing up the edge of the bar. Now, I talked about the fish that lived in the bay round to the right here, and I could go and look at them. And just off the end of this tree here, which has always been here for all those years, just 10 yards off the front of that, I had a load of fish off of there. And they were areas that I never saw anybody else fishing. And something that I got very, very keen on in the end on here was baiting up spots that nobody else was fishing. And in a lot of respects, that's why I got the bites I did. Other people were getting a lot of bites too. It was a very productive fishery. But yeah, that bait introduction and putting it in unusual places, I think, it caught me a lot of fish. This swim, probably the furthest I caught the fish from most of the time was 15 yards, and it's not what a lot of other people were doing. And then we come to Daisy Bay. First and foremost, it's named after a wonderful old mirror that lived in here called Daisy. And I think I caught her 4 or 5 times in the time that I was here. A wonderful little fish, and for an old girl, she used to, you knew she was trying to pull your arms out your sockets. Incredible swim, more in what I found out about the fish really than actually catching them. Yes, you'd have the odd night in here where you get 2 or 3 at a time, but it could go very dead and the fish would move out and you wouldn't catch anything. But up the trees was the most vital thing for me, looking down on the bay, and they'd come in and they'd circle around. Very often at certain times of year, they'd do it in a very, very deliberate way, exactly the same. Sort of maybe 20, 30 fish come round and they go around the bay, and you could almost pinpoint exactly where they'd feed. They'd disappear from view for 10 minutes and they'd come back up and go on again. And once I put a bit of bait there, and the next time they came round, they'd dip down on the spot and you'd get a bite. It was just wonderful fishing, very visual, and I loved it. It taught me so much about the carp, and I think that was probably, if you look back on the things you've done, the problem I had in catching the biggest fish in the lake. I fished so hard for those 3 winters, and it became such an obsession that the way that I fished, I just couldn't stop doing it because I was catching all the time. But I got there in the end, but we'll get to that in a little while. We're on the other side of Daisy Bay now. The Daisy swim is directly opposite. And I mean, the first thing about the bay, I worry about carp fishing when you're only allowed to fish from recognised swims. I've never understood that. The art of fishing is first find your fish and fish for them, and you're not allowed to do that. But as I said before, it taught me an awful lot. Now, there is a tree behind me. That one there, big old dark boy on. It wasn't that big actually, and it was a lot less mature in those days and waggled an awful lot more in the wind than it's doing right now. But I used to sit up there until my legs went to sleep. Quite literally, I found it difficult to get out of the tree. And in the end, we're talking now the winter of 2007, after Christmas, and I'd made sure, I told everybody this was my last attempt. I didn't want to waste the rest of my life just chasing around after one single fish. I found eventually a spot where I knew he fed, and I knew he fed there regularly, and I started baiting it up, and I baited it up over a number of weeks. And we'll get to the end of that story shortly. But again, you need to use your eyes. It's not just a case of looking at a swim and, oh, this will do. In those days, everything revolved around finding fish, and that's what drives my fishing to this very day. And practically all the fish I've caught were because of that visual part of the mechanics of catching a carp. And yeah, I owe that tree an awful lot, and yeah, I'm glad to see it still here. I hope I've painted a picture of how much Frimley had got under my skin. I hadn't caught Charlie's mate coming into what I had designated as my last winter on there, 2006, 2007. I absolutely loved the place. I'd enjoyed every single moment of it, and but I felt I had to turn my back on it. But what I started to do was climb the trees all the time in the bays, not so much in Fox Bay at the top end, but Daisy Bay, which is behind me here. And I saw the fish. They would take the same route. But it changed after Christmas, unbelievably. They came in from one side before Christmas, when the air pressure was down a little bit lower, I think, and they come in about 2 foot under the surface, visit a couple of spots, and then swim out and disappear. I did catch a few on zigs, sort of mid-water, straight out from the double bores and round to the mouth of the bay. And whilst I was putting zigs out there, you reel your lead in. And I found that the marginal shelf, right as tight as you can round to the right of that swim where the leads are, down to the bottom, you get to the bottom of that shelf. It went from clawy, horrible stuff to a lovely smooth bit of silt, and then to the gravel as you came up. And I did it with a marker float after I'd found it. And I found the perfect spot. This is January of 2007. I didn't start baiting it to begin with. It was such a popular swim. I just wanted to look at what people were doing before I started baiting that spot. And the other reason it became very, very important, because the carp changed the way they came into the bay in the new year. And they came in from the far side, past the deep point, and round. And there were two specific spots. One right in the back of Daisy Bay where a few of them would disappear, and one almost right under my feet where I was up the tree. It was as near as I could get up a tree to the mouth of that bay. And there was one in there, and you knew which fish it was. You knew it was Charlie's mate. It was visibly massive, and so much bigger than the other fish around it, and they would disappear in that spot. Not all of them. It would break off. 2 or 3 fish would go down to start with. When I started putting bait on it, a few more fish to go down. And every time he came around, when I saw Charlie's mate, I could keep my eye on it and he'd go down in that spot. I gave up with zigs. I gave up really with everything other than wanting to fish that spot, to be truthful. That was the one I thought I would catch on. And other people went in that swim. They all cast out to the middle or to the bottom of the exposed bar, and nobody ever bothered with it, which was ideal for me. I came down, it was the 30th, no it wasn't, it was the 31st of March, the last day of the season. And I'd been down the night before, and I put about a kilo of boilies on the spot, 15mm boilies. And Steve Mogford, a mate of mine, was fishing in the fallen trees. And he was like having a bit of a laugh with me, saying, I'll move in there later on and see if I can catch something, ha ha ha. In the end, I got him to say that he would keep an eye on it, let me know if anybody moved in. So I got back at 4:30 in the morning. And the first thing I did, I normally stopped in swim 3, and I've talked about that swim before. I stopped in there every time. I could look over the whole of the lake and sit in there for a while, and very, very often I would see something, and I'd move around it. But I never fished it. I just used it as a viewpoint. I didn't even stop there on that session. I just ran around to the double bores, and it was free, and I took a huge sigh of relief. What I didn't realise was it was the first day of those spring tickets, and the lake was going to be absolutely rammed. And to be honest with you, when I set that trap and I flicked it out, I got it absolutely bang on the money. My little bag set up in my normal little setup for fishing, close in spots was just a leg clip with a dumpy lead on it, 25-pound strippable braid, a size 7 SSC hook as they were then, a long hair, and a little barrel hook bait with a little bit of corn on the top, and clipped into the PVA bag. I just flicked that down there, put about 50 boilers over the top, and put the rod on the rest. Slackened the lines off, and I just sat there. And from about 8 o'clock onwards, when the light was filling in the sky, probably a bit earlier, 7:30, just people were arriving, going in the swims right opposite me, round the corner. Every time I heard the bivvy pegs getting smashed into the ground, it was like it was another nail in my coffin for another year. And I'd assured myself I'd never come back. I had a brew with Steve Mogford, told him my tides of woe, and went and sat back in the swim. And I sat there. I was going to do 2 nights, and at 10:30, the right-hand rod, the indicator just pulled right up and then went down at exactly the same speed. I thought, it's got to be a liner. But it didn't quite get to the floor, and it just smashed into the rod, and it was away. I'm never one that you get. I think big fish fight slightly differently to smaller fish. But as soon as I sort of picked up that rod and I'm trying to get control, I can honestly tell you, for about 5 minutes, I had absolutely no control whatsoever. And it stayed deep, and it felt powerful, and it felt big. And to my mind, I could only think of one fish. And if that didn't make me nervous, I was going to get a whole lot nervous a few minutes later. I fought it in the open water. And I thought, you stay there as long as you like running around. I don't have to, mess you around too much. And I'd turn him, get him coming back again, and he'd go on another run. I'd get him coming back again. And what I wanted him to be was as still as possible when he got to that shallower water off the front of the right-hand board. And all of a sudden, there was a swirl and a bit of a tail, and then the shoulders came out. And one of the most noticeable and recognisable features of Charlie's mate is the dip in his back, a very slight dip behind his shoulders. And I can picture it now, like it was yesterday, that set of that little dip and I knew which fish it was. And I turned into a jellyfish. I don't think I was never more nervous about jumping out of an aeroplane when I was a young lad, or doing some of the crazy stuff I did during my time in the mob. Never have I been that frightened, and never have I been able to put every bad thought, anything. I just didn't think about a damn thing. And eventually, in my outstretched net, she slipped over the cord, and Charlie's mate was mine.
What you got there, Chilly?
I have a
goldfish.
44-pound, 4/8 common carp from Charlie's mate. Light my freaking fire. Look
at that.
You just click away to your heart's content, Kevin.
Well, I've only got 999 on it. I just wasted 2 getting it out of the water.
Oh no, look at it.
Yeah,
Let's keep it.
it's outrageous.
Oh, look at that golden colour.
I just stick that over there, get that over there.
Stick in at your head.
The only silliness is the look on your face, bro.
Oh, look at that. And arms like that.
Behave, bro.
Yeah, I will be.
Let the dancer in because he's got the camera.
That is a bloody view.
Right, do the other side.
Just doing pictures. On your back.
Chilly, are you happy, mate?
I don't think I can put into words how I feel like that. Did I say I'm better than Richard Walker? That'll do, lad. Alright, baby, alright. Right,
Well, I've got it.
you need to get down low for use that.
This is Chile with a 44 Charlie's Mate Common. Absolutely fantastic. What a picture.
Alright?
Yeah, right.
Alright.
Let me get behind you.
Want a kissy shot, Dan? That'll do me.
Look at that.
That is a beast. Life I'm glad you did it, mate. Nice one, bro.
Well done, mate.
Top man.
Nice one.
You're the man, mate. You're the man.
Come on, Daddy boy. Got any more beer, Steve?
I might have one.
That's
Ah, it's awesome, mate.
4 years of my life, all wrapped up in about 2
all
minutes.
false.
Yeah, it is really. Well, I missed last winter, but oh, well, this is going to be quite difficult. Phew. I didn't think it'd be that hard to talk about it, but it is. Wow, the double boards. I haven't stood here for 15 years, and sometimes your honesty gives too much away about you and your fishing, but I have to tell you, it's taken me a couple of minutes to walk out here. I could feel the tears building in the back of my eye, and I can feel it now. It's quite incredible after all the work and how much that obsession took out of mine and Lynn's lives. Was incredible, but to stand right here on the board where I landed that fish from, it is an incredible feeling, and it just gets you right there. I'm just looking behind me a lot because that eventually is the spot where I caught Charlie's Mate. No more than 3 rod lengths just off the end of this. Everybody fishes out there to the obvious point, the bar. I did exactly the same. And in a lot of respects, you start catching what everybody else is catching. And I just thought, I want more. So I explored more of the terrain, and an awful lot of the fish I caught out of this swim came from no more than 15 yards from the bank, and the fishing was absolutely incredible. Basically, the more bait I could get in quite quietly, the more I caught, and people didn't want to fish close in, so they weren't getting fished by other people. And that is the spot I found from the tree just down there to my left. And this swim, well, the whole complex will always have a place in my heart, but to actually walk out here, on the very spot I landed that carp all those years ago is a truly emotional moment for me. And like I said before, it took me 41 years to get there, and I cannot even begin to tell you how glad I was about that. I stood in the swim this morning talking about it, and I felt emotional then, and I feel emotional about it now. I do apologise for that, because it was such a massive event. As I said before, there was only a couple of other commons in the country of that size at that time. It was a remarkable fish. Secondly, it was as big as Walker's fish. 4 ounces bigger, to be honest with you. 44 pound and 4 ounces. It was everything that 6-year-old boy had wanted, and from a boy to a man, I had yearned for. I just, nothing about fishing could ever have been more wanted at that stage in my life. And when I think what Lynn had to go through, with my obsession, the things I got up to make it work, it was all that moment. It was all encapsulated in that landing net as I looked at it. And I had tears in my eyes. I've got tears in my eyes now, and I'm not ashamed of it. I'm more thinking about Lynn than the fish itself. And, I doff my cap to her for putting up with me. But at least, as I said when I got home, you've now got your husband back. And we got on my Harley Davidson that day, and I drove off into the hills catching flies in my teeth. I didn't stop smiling, and I'll be very truthful with you. I turned to Lynn when we stopped at a pub for a bite to eat. I was going to stop carp fishing. I'd done everything I wanted to do in fishing. I've caught sailfish around the world, dorados and barracudas, sharks of all kind, and I've fished in so many different places, drilling holes in the ice in Norway and pulling little char out of them and eating them. The lochs of Scotland, when I was supposed to be doing something with some submarine, and all I wanted to do was, go mackerel fishing in the sea and then go pike fishing in one of the lochs. I've done it all around the world, but this was the most special fishing thing I'd ever done. And Steve Mogford came over. He confirmed it was Charlie's mate, and he confirmed it. I held up the scales and he read it out. And I talk about Lynn, but I have to talk about Richard Walker, the way that he had shaped my life. And I can't thank him enough. God rest his soul. But it was a massive moment, and the press got hold of it. I wrote about it, and eventually, thankfully, I had a final chapter for Light My Fire, and it's got all that story in there. But I look at it now with all these Frimley fish in there. My rods in the double boards, and there's a photograph of me with Charlie's mate as I'm taking out the sack, and to me it's the greatest fishing photograph at that time it was that I'd ever have, because the smile, the look on my face, the fish that's on the mat, it was unbelievable. And it all stemmed from this man and this book, and I can't ever thank him enough. God bless Richard Walker, and I doff my cap to Charlie's mate, who's probably just swam past us after eating everybody's bait, bless his heart. But what a fish, what a complex of lakes, and it has a future, a massive future, and it's a massive part of carp fishing history. I come from an era where that was such a special fish, and unfortunately there's a few of them around today, but if you get one, think of him and think what it was like to catch, you know, the only one in the country like that. Unbelievable man, unbelievable book, and unbelievable fishing, and thankfully I'm still doing it.